Okay, our next presenter is Matt Paff from Attaché Software. Matt is the General Manager of Attaché, which is one of Australia's leading suppliers of accounting and payroll software solutions. Matt previously ran a successful software consulting business specialising in the aged care sector. He remains deeply passionate about the industry and the role IT has to play in the evolution that is occurring. With his presentation entitled Holistic Chunkification, great word, of IT systems and the importance of integration in driving efficiencies within the aged care sector, would you please give a warm welcome to Matt Paff.
In spite of the really weird name that doesn't make much sense to most of you, I promise to speak in plain English today. It's a part of the point of my presentation to use such a title. Bit of a session overview. Look, you all are aware, if you're not aware by now, then you're living under a rock, but there's rapid change occurring within the aged care sector. IT has a very important role to play in that, and again, I think everyone is aware of that. What, unfortunately, the IT industry tends to do is we use jargon and buzzwords to effectively overpower our consumers and take a level of knowledge to sell. The industry is very guilty of using buzzwords, acronyms and jargon, and what I promise to do is to demystify some of those for you and then really focus on why a holistic approach to IT is essential for every provider and make the comment that a holistic approach doesn't appear to be what the industry in general is doing right now. So this is my view of the world. The aged care industry itself is going through three fairly significant changes, or changes occurring based on three fairly significant factors. One being the growth in the sector, government reform and information technology. Just speaking on them for a moment, just stealing a graphic from the Adelaide Advertiser. There's currently 1 million people in aged care today. By 2050, the expectation is 3.5 million. The cost of aged care, currently about 10 billion. They're expected to be 50 billion by 2050. So there's a significant amount of growth. Now, what that actually tends to do is it drives competition. People outside the industry go, you know what, there's a big growth area where we can go and target. And so what you're starting to see is construction companies now coming in thinking they can run aged care facilities. You're seeing Telstra really identifying that this is an industry where there's going to be growth and trying to provide services into this industry. You'll find a lot of private equity coming on board because that's their role, is to find growth opportunities and really invest into those growth areas. Simple formula. Significant, well-publicised and well-researched growth opportunity generates significant interest and investment by both new and established players. So competition unquestionably is going to increase in the aged care sector as the growth opportunity expands. Whilst I talked about the numbers, this scares the hell out of the government. So the other big thing is government reform, and we all know about living longer, living better, and the other reforms that have really been driven through. Government reforms, at their core, are designed to drive efficiency within the sector and in so doing put downward pressure on costs. That's their motivation. They may talk about it being in the interest of individuals, etc., but it's about driving efficiencies that reduce the impact on the budget down the line. Okay? The problem is more red tape, more reform actually can have an inverse effect on the administration required to comply. And consumer-directed care is a perfect example of that. It used to be okay for community care providers to go and apply for a program, a bucket of money, which they basically were able to just expend and report on the entire bucket. Under consumer-directed care, they need to provide a consumer statement to the individual. So the collection of data has been multiplied by the number of people within each individual program. It used to be okay to just report everything in a bucket. Now I've got to break it down to the granular level of the individual. So the administrative burden has gone up exponentially through that process. This big word out there at the moment is the digital disturb that we're all basically feeling. Basically, IT is both a driver of change and a solution to help organisations adapt to change. Okay, so the example there being, well, your administrative efforts in order to collect data for CDC reporting doesn't actually have to go up. If you're implementing good IT systems to make that data collection easy and collecting it at the source, you can actually decrease the amount of effort required to collect that information and report on it. So IT is also changing. The talk we just heard about information technology being able to help with the way that we care for the individuals, being able to drive efficiencies through the sector. IT is at the core. The important point is quality, well-implemented IT systems are an essential ingredient in driving efficiency and remaining competitive. If people aren't on board with IT because they get overwhelmed by there's just too much, everyone's telling me they use these buzzwords, these jargons, but you know what, I'm going to retire in a couple of years, I don't need to worry about that. Well, those organisations are going to be the ones that struggle to survive because competition will actually drive them out of the sector. Just to emphasise a point, and you can read that as quick as I can read it to you. There's all sorts of research out there, and singularly, IT is the #1 biggest driver of efficiencies across all industries right now. Okay, industries can be made more productive through quality implementations of IT systems, and aged care is no different. The problem is the IT industry is the new snake oil salesman. You know, and I can say this because I've been in the industry for 15 years, and I can speak to the fact that buzzwords, jargon and acronyms is what has been used by IT marketers to sell their products for quite some time. You know, you hear them all the time. And look, I just wanted to give you an insider's opinion on this today because a lot of people go, oh, I don't understand. Well, we have a rule at Attaché, if you can't explain it to your mum, then you're talking crap. Okay, and that's a thing that the industry needs to learn. They need to be more open about what they actually mean in plain English. So I'm just going to basically have a little bit of a session on seeing through the fog. There was it's on YouTube actually. If you get on YouTube and look up a guy called Larry Ellison, he's the CEO of Oracle. He talks about the cloud. And the famous quote that comes out of the talk is the IT industry is more fashion-driven than ladies' fashion. You know, we use the latest and the greatest and the newest and the best, and most of the time it's not actually new, we just give it a fancy new word. Okay? So here's a short, sharp guide to the IT trends as I see it. I can't start the presentation without referring to this, the cloud. Everywhere you go at the moment we're hearing about the cloud. Perfect example. It's a new name to something that's actually been around for a long time. Now, if you go back to the 90s, Citrix brought out something called remote desktop, and Microsoft with Windows NT brought out remote desktop, and there was a thing before that, wide area networks and mainframes. These were all basically connected systems. The cloud is what we're now calling the new. The difference with the cloud is that it's reached the point of adoption because the technology as far as broadband, as far as the NBN, is now catching up. So these great tools that really were unreliable in the past, they were inconsistent, are now being able to be delivered in a much more consistent way. And certainly mobility is contributing to that. People are out and about, they are reading their emails as they're listening to talks at an aged care conference. This is how the world works. So just what is the cloud? Now, I'm going to let you in on a secret. More than anything, the cloud is a business model. Okay? Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying to you. What the cloud offers is IT vendors who have struggled to generate recurring revenue out of their model. It is the way to get recurring revenue. Okay? I go back to about 2000, 2001. I remember Telstra started talking about charging for timed local calls. Okay? Every talkback station in Australia was flooded with calls. They can't do it. You know, you can't charge for time local calls. Then technology came along. And if I call you across the room, I paid for a time call. And look, the models continued to evolve, and now you have cap plans and these sorts of things. But the point is, a change in technology provides for a change in a business model. And the #1 driving factor behind the cloud is the move to SaaS. Software as a service. Software as a service is in fact an interchangeable word with the word cloud, which gives it away. Software as a service is a word we used back in the 90s to talk about subscription software. It's now an interchangeable word for the cloud. So that points to the fact that it's a business model. I went and consulted Wikipedia. What did Wikipedia have to say about cloud computing? A paradigm where computer resources are offered as a utility. It goes on to say, like electricity, moving away from a traditional CapEx model to an OpEx model. That sounds like a business model to me, and it is, okay? But I'm not talking at this in a negative way. What it does is it provides for more secure businesses that aren't just going to be flash in the pan. In the past, IT companies popped up and disappeared overnight. Now what you're getting is a sustainable business model where these software providers can continue to develop their applications into the future because they've got a funding model that allows them to continue to invest. No question, the cloud is also a deployment method. PC World magazine, storing and accessing data and programs over the internet instead of your computer's hard drive. That's fairly logical. It is what the cloud is also about, but it's nothing new. I talked about Citrix, I talked about remote desktop, I talked about wide area networks. This stuff's not a new thing. But what is new is that everybody has these things. Everybody has access to 4G, to NBN starting to roll out. What's really going on? Well, what's it all it mean? It's a deployment method, it's a business model. There's three key things. It's about accessibility, about mobility, and about connectivity. Accessibility is all the people sitting there looking at their emails. If I had have asked those people, let's say, who's got email on their phone with them or on a tablet device right now available to them? If I had asked you that question 3 years ago, half of you would have put your hand up, okay? 5 years ago, probably one or two of you using, is it a strawberry? No, BlackBerry, that's right. Who even remembers what those things were, right? Sorry if you've still got one. It's just wouldn't be funny if I didn't say it. But look, the world is now moving more and more to real time. It isn't okay. Like, my wife had a baby 6 weeks ago, and I was at the hospital, she's in labour, and someone sent me an email. Didn't read it. I had other priorities. 4 hours later, they rang me and left me a nasty voicemail message. Why haven't you responded to my email? When did email become a real-time communication? It's not supposed to be, but these things make it a real-time communication. Wherever you are, people are more and more expecting emails to be answered instantly. And that's just an example of what's going on. Everything in the world is happening quicker and quicker and quicker, more and more in real time. And accessibility is providing the way to do that. You don't have to be in your office to go and get your email anymore. You don't have to be on site to do stuff. It can happen wherever you are. Mobility is a part of that, but it's also something new. Who had ever heard of Android or iOS 10 years ago? These are now the operating systems that are driving the majority of devices that you see here today. Okay? They didn't exist 10 years ago. It used to be okay for a software developer like Attaché to go, you know what, we only run on Windows. 97% of the world's business runs on Windows, so stuff you if you want to go and get those Apple devices or think you're going to use open source like Linux, go and do it. We don't care because the majority of the market runs on Windows. Well, that's not okay anymore. It's about cross-platform. People are using multiple different platforms, and basically they need to be able to get access to their systems on multiple different platforms. So that's a real driver of change within the industry. Connectivity is the next big one. And there's two types of connectivity that I talk about, intra and inter connectivity. And I promised a plain English guide, so I better drill in on what I mean by that. Intra is connecting your staff to your organisation like never before. You've all got your emails here, that's connecting you to your office. Can you get your payslips online? Can you enter timesheets? Can you do the things that you need to do to operate your job outside of the office? Connecting you to your role 24/7, no matter where you are. That connectivity is really driving efficiencies inside organisations. Inter-organisation connectivity is being driven by a number of factors. One, people are actually starting to realise if they help their customers and their suppliers across all industries, they actually can benefit themselves. If I've got a supplier who's struggling to get me what I'm asked for, but I make their life easier by providing some level of connectivity, some level of way of dealing with it more efficiently, then they're going to supply better for me. So people are actually starting to think outside their own into the ecosystem in which they operate. And government's driving changes into the ecosystem. The average Australian company was taking 100 hours per annum to do superannuation lodgements last year. So what have they done? They've brought in SuperStream to force the superannuation companies to connect that ecosystem. It should have happened 30 years ago, but superannuation industry has never been an efficient industry because of the separation between the administrators and the funds. So basically now the government's stepping in and saying you have to accept electronic ways of doing this. And the time taken to do super is coming down from 100 hours to about an hour a year. So super choice created a problem and the government's now fixed it with super stream. But that's another topic. The thing that's really driving change in the cloud is something called APIs. APIs is not something new. API stands for Application Program Interface. Another word for its integration, interoperability, interfacing of data, single point of entry. Hopefully you all know what I mean. What modern APIs do is that this all happens in the background without anyone having to manually do anything. It all happens without you thinking about it. Web service APIs, the thing that the cloud delivers is for this to happen in the background. So what you get is connection between systems like never before. And that leads to the big word, chunkification. Chunkification's not my word. It's a guy called Doug Sleeter out of the US. Doug's a bit of a accounting software guru. But he's talked about chunkification in this way, splitting up the separate parts of the overall business management system into discrete parts. I think it's another example of snake oil salespeople because in reality we used to call this best of breed. We used to call it getting the right solution for the right area of your business. Chunkification is just a fancy new word to make it sound cool and new. But what it's about is it's saying, like never before, it's easy to stitch these systems together. It used to be manual exports of data. It used to be no connection between the systems. You had to key the data in. Now what it provides is seamless integration in the background without even thinking about it because of these APIs that I just talked about. So chunkification is more practical within any organisation, and certainly within the aged care sector, it's very important because there's a lot of different chunks within the aged care sector and no one system exists right now that does absolutely everything. Or if they do, they don't do it well. Jack of all trades, master of none. The reality is there's lots of different chunks. You've just seen them fly by. And even down to care management, we see the big trend in community care. The system packages, and I don't mean to offend any of the vendors that are here, but you're either really good at residential care management or you're good at community care management. There's not really too many systems I've come across that are both residential and community care management systems. So even within the industry, there's different chunks for different horses for courses. So what do you do about all this? The number one thing is be strategic. And I've got to say, the dealings I've had with the sector is there's a real lack of strategy in the way that IT is being rolled out. It certainly doesn't apply necessarily at the top end of town. They've got lots of resources and they've got IT departments that can be strategic about the way they roll things out. But the majority of providers in Australia aren't at the top end of town. I think 75 providers in Australia account for 50% of the beds. So there's a real skew towards the big end of town. There's a lot in that small to medium space, and I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on those guys to survive into the future over the next decade. And the way they will survive is being strategic about what they do, particularly in the IT sector. So here's the typical strategy that I've witnessed, and you might disagree with me, but I'll tell you what, I've been to a lot of aged care facilities over the last few years, and I've seen this ad nauseum. It's ad hoc. Short term, on an immediate needs basis, we've got a problem we've got to deal with. We've got CDC reporting coming in. How are we going to deal with that? Let's deal with that problem and that problem only. Operational needs overrules administrative impacts. So basically the people out doing the operations, having a problem with operations, we don't want to give them any more work because they're already busy. So we'll just push the work down to the admin team, and the admin team can take care of all the work that's required to do the data entry. It lacks a holistic view across the whole organisation. If an operational staff had to do 5 minutes extra a day, but it saved 3 staff in the admin team, doesn't that holistically make sense? That view isn't generally taken. What is generally taken is, I'm going to use she who screams the loudest, but I should have said the one who screams the loudest is who gets their way. So if you have, for example, a Don who's in charge of rostering, and the Don says, you know what, I need a better rostering system than this Excel or whatever system that I'm using. So generally, we go and focus on the rostering system, such as a time target or something like that, and they only look at the rostering system. Little do they know the impact that they have to have on payroll. Okay, well, where are the employees coming from? They're coming out of the payroll system, or vice versa. Where do the employees come from for payroll is they come out of the HR system because you're onboarding staff and that sort of stuff. Rostering flows through to time and attendance, which flows through to award interpretation and payroll. Rostering comes from the care plans that you put in place, and the care plans basically lead to what rosters that you then want to put in place. Payroll leads to general ledger postings that go through to your general ledger system, and then I need to report on stuff. So what tends to happen is people will just go and look at that without actually looking at all the interactions and the interplays between systems. And because the person who is screaming about it is vocal and management have imperfect knowledge of the IT systems, generally they get their way. Now what has to happen is that has to change, because the more that happens, the more disjointed the systems are, the more administrative work that ends up happening. And what you get is you're very uncompetitive. You know, in a very competitive market this is going to really turn into over the next few years, you will not be able to be uncompetitive like that. The other thing I see within the aged care sector is this little tool here is seen to be the panacea. It's the solver of all problems. I actually went to an aged care conference a couple of years ago where a very large supplier, who shall remain nameless, was a part of the rollout of CDC trials, individual care trials. And they talked about how they did 90 and how they managed it was all in Excel. So they'll keying the data into payroll, they'll keying the data into their accounting system, they'll keying the data in there, and then they'll re-keying it all into Excel. And I just sunk in my chair and nearly vomited, because that is the worst thing you can do. If you're using Excel to basically manage and if you're using Excel, generally means you're double entering data, and double entry of data should be the thing you're trying to do away with within your organisation. So what's the outcome of all this? Generally disjointed organisations and disjointed systems. An ever-increasing exponential growth in the administrative burden. And what people don't realise, the impacts of all this is disharmony amongst departments. The admin department starts getting the real craps with the operations department, because they don't care the amount of work that they're causing, and the fact that the payroll person has to work 70 hours a week to get the staff paid because the timesheets are coming in an all disjointed way. Okay? You have that sort of organisational culture, you will not survive in a competitive marketplace. Your staff will leave you and they'll go and work where they feel more comfortable. Inefficiency is rife in that, and it will not be competitive. So I'm going to finish with my 10 tips to an effective IT strategy. Number one is be holistic. Don't look at things in isolation. Have a look across the whole organisation and look at where I'm capturing the data and try and flow it through the ecosystem. Forget about finding a single system that does it all well. I haven't found one yet. They don't exist. Okay? Recognise that the key focus is about capturing data at the source and sending it through the ecosystem, not necessarily putting it into one system and staying in that system forever. It's about capturing data and not having to rekey it, and that's where the APIs I talked about really come into play. Excel is not a business system. In general, where it's used is an example of inefficiency. Unless you're using it as a reporting tool and you've got integrated output of data into Excel, that's fine. But if you're using it to key data in, then it's inefficient and shouldn't be done. Chunkify your business process. Look at all the different areas across the organisation, create the chunks and create the best system appropriate to that chunk, and make sure that it can integrate. Modern APIs make chunkification an efficient, attractive solution for all aged care providers. Focus on return on investment, not price. A number of organisations that have made decisions historically based on we've got the budget for it, so then we'll do it. Well, under a SaaS model, you're going to pay for this ongoing forever. So you've got to start looking at the return on investment, not what the budget allocation has been for this particular period. The budget allocation is perpetual when it comes to IT in 2014. Except that IT is no longer CapEx, budgeted based on OpEx. Number one mistake people then make is they get all enthused about change. Let's jump in and let's change everything. Worst thing you can do. Eat the apple, eat the elephant one bite at a time. It's about incremental change. Or as they say, painting the harbour bridge. I don't know if you all know, but they'll paint the harbour bridge and then they'll go and do spot checks to make sure they've done a good job. They'll fix up the spot checks and then they'll go back and they'll start the whole thing again. They never stop painting the harbour bridge. It is perpetually being painted. The same thing applies to your information systems, your IT systems. They are always changing, and they're changing faster than ever before. So a system is only ever as good as it's implemented, maintained and utilised. And in that respect, you cannot sit still. It has to consistently be going back and reviewed and improved and maintained and upgraded and making sure that it's implemented correctly, because the rate of change in our industry is faster than ever before. Thank you.